Indian Prime Minister recently visited Sri Lanka, coming all the way from Thailand after participating in the BIMSTEC meeting. Let us in this video try to analyze what are the geopolitical aspects involved in India and Sri Lanka relations. In order to understand the significance of the visit, if you broadly look at the kind of agreements that were signed during this period, you will get a clear-cut idea about what significance Sri Lanka holds for India today. First and foremost is that India initiated a trilateral diplomatic concept where India worked with the United Arab Emirates and a three-party agreement was signed where collectively India and UAE will assist Sri Lanka in development of their ports and enhancing the connectivity projects. Secondly, during the bilateral visit, the Prime Minister inaugurated certain projects which were related to infrastructure, connectivity and railways. Now, why is India investing so much of economic diplomatic energy with respect to Sri Lanka? To understand and grasp these things better, let's put the things in a chronological context. Way back in 2009, when the LTT crisis came to an end, V. Prabhakaran, the chief leader of the LTT, was killed in one of the ambush by the security forces. After the LTT movement got crushed, starting from 2010 onwards, Sri Lanka wanted to now focus on development of their economy. It is at this juncture that Sri Lanka looked up to US for help, but the Americans were not coming forward to help Sri Lanka because the Americans at that time in 2010 were busy firefighting their own crisis, which were the economic crisis. It is in this particular context that the strategic space at the economic level, which was neglected by the Americans then, it was finally taken over by none other but the Chinese. The Chinese actually took up the initiative of helping Sri Lanka economically, and they thought that it would be a litmus test for their own global aspirations. In this backdrop, in 2010, China began to send the members of United Front Work Department to Sri Lanka. It's very surprising to know that the members of the United Front Work Department are none other but actually Chinese spies who are associated today with the Ministry of State Security of China. And these people, when they came to Sri Lanka, analyzed the economic situation of Sri Lanka. They ended up in giving a 2-point prescription. The first point in the prescription was that they told Sri Lanka very clearly that if you want to economically redevelop yourself, focus on developing your coastline and also focus on developing what is called as your hill stations. A combination of your coastline and hill station development will lead to a huge inflow of tourists, and tourism will be one of your economic driver. The second important aspect that the Sri Lankans were recommended or advised by the Chinese was to focus on what is called as micro-industrial development. They said that you must focus on micro-industries. Doing so will give jobs to the local people at the grassroots. Such kind of micro-development of industries will also lead to production of certain goods, and you being part of the larger coastline, surrounded by waters from all the four sides, we can help you develop certain ports, we can help you develop certain infrastructure within your country and help you take these industrial products manufactured in different parts of your country to the ports and then integrate them to the global supply chains. So it is in this context that by 2011, working in close association with the Chinese United Front Work Department, that Sri Lanka finally embarked upon this process where they went on to work upon enhancing and building up their tourism sector at one place and worked upon building what is known as the micro industries and the intention of developing an export potential out of it. Everything went well from 2012 all the way till the COVID crisis. When the world witnessed the COVID crisis, one thing became very clear, that at that juncture, during the COVID time period, it became amply clear to Sri Lanka that they are up to in a very bad situation, because when the world witnessed the COVID crisis and the world witnessed the global lockdowns, the first consequence of the global lockdown was that the tourism sector came to a crushing halt. When the tourism sector collapsed, immediately the next implication was on the global supply chains and the micro industries that the Sri Lankans were running. As a result of which there were mass protests in Sri Lanka. These protests were eventually subdued, and the subduing of the protests also costed the government at that time their own power. Gotabaya Rajapakse, who was the then leader, lost his term and he was replaced by a new person whose name was Ranil Wickremesinghe. When Ranil Wickremesinghe finally took up the power in Sri Lanka in 2022, he embarked upon a neoliberal agenda. He worked very closely with the Americans, and Americans also tried to regain the space that they had earlier lost to the Chinese, and therefore began to work closely with Ranil Wickremesinghe. But once Ranil Wickremesinghe came, no doubt, when he had the backing of Indians also, when he had the backing of the Americans also, it does not mean that the Chinese were wiped out of Sri Lanka. The Chinese began, in fact, from 2022 to play a very crucial role at another grassroots level. They started reviving a movement that was actually launched way back in 1980s, which is called Janta Vimukti Perumana movement, which was led by none other but Anur Kumar Disanaike. They started nurturing Disanaike. They started resurrecting the Janta Vimukti Perumana. They started also supporting the Aragalya movement, as a result of which mass mobilization occurred for the next 2 years from 2022 to 24, and the result eventually came in 24. When the elections happened in Sri Lanka, Ranil Wickremesinghe was brutally defeated, and he was defeated by none other but the Chinese-backed, Chinese-supported Anur Kumar Disanaike. Now the problem is that when Anur Kumar Disanaike came up, we never had any issue with him. It's after all an internal affair of the Sri Lankans to elect whomsoever they wish to elect. But the problem was, for India in Sri Lanka, none other but China. China was a problem because India for a very long period of time had been complaining to the Sri Lankans that we are not happy with the kind of activities that the Chinese are doing in Sri Lanka. Now the question is, what were these activities? The most important activity was that the Chinese were deliberately sending research vessels into the Sri Lankan waters. These research vessels were none other but actually spy ships. And when these research vessels came into the waters, the problem of these research ships was that these ships came here only for the purpose of spying on the Indian territory and nothing else. In fact, in January 2024, when Ranil Wickremesinghe was still on the throne, India at that time, leveraging its own influence, had engaged with Sri Lanka and convinced Sri Lanka to come out with an agreement. In January 2024, Ranil Wickremesinghe had actually proposed a one single year moratorium on entry of Chinese research vessels into the Sri Lankan waters. Now, important aspect is that this 1 year moratorium, which was signed by then Ranil Wickremesinghe government in January 2024, came to an end in January 2025. And in January 2025, Ranil Wickremesinghe was not there in power, but we had Anur Kumar Disanaike in power. It is in this backdrop that after the expiry of this 1 year moratorium agreement, India decided to have some strategic patience. As part of the strategic patience, India decided that we will observe for the next 2 months what is Sri Lanka up to. Are they inviting the Chinese? Are they still going to, invite the Chinese research vessels into the Sri Lankan waters? After observing the Chinese tactics and Sri Lankan response to that in February and March, it is in the month of April that this visit finally occurred. It is in this visit that now behind the scenes, Indian Prime Minister along with the experts that accompanied him gave some very clear red lines to Sri Lanka. In this visit, the Prime Minister categorically told Sri Lanka that, see, the biggest problem today is that most of these research vessels that come to your territory are not normal vessels. These vessels today are vessels that come to the Indian Ocean for a very specific purpose. These vessels today come for, number one, observing the satellites because they have satellite monitors on board. These vessels are fitted with ballistic missile tracking facilities. These vessels on board also have equipments to ensure study of ocean currents and ocean circulation. And more importantly, these vessels, when they traverse in the Indian Ocean, they undertake hydrographic surveys and they undertake mapping of the Indian Ocean. The mapping of the Indian Ocean is a big problem because Chinese today try to map the polymetallic nodules. They try to map all the critical rare earth minerals which are found at the seabed level in the Indian Ocean under the guise of these surveys. In fact, the Indian side this time very categorically also informed Sri Lanka that the bigger problem is that all these research vessels of China, when they happen to move away from the waters of Sri Lanka and they try to go back to China, during that path in the water, India told Sri Lanka that these research vessels, we showed them photographic evidences also, that these vessels also, very importantly, shut down the automatic identification signal systems. And because they shut down these automatic identification signal systems, as a result of which, when our security forces, when our civilian authorities try to build a maritime domain awareness in the Indian Ocean, we do not observe these ships, rather we observe black patches in the water, and these black patches are observed by our satellites, thereby compelling our naval ships to move immediately closer to locate these black patches in the water. And the moment we go to these black patches, we find that these are Chinese vessels. So we told Sri Lanka that the deliberate attempt to switch off these automated identification signal systems is an attempt to drain the Indian resources, to drain Indian naval resources by dragging them unnecessarily towards a particular point in the water. And in fact, we also told them that the deliberate attempt to drag the Indian naval ships into that particular place where these ships are located is an attempt by the Chinese to also analyze that what routes do the Indian ships generally prefer to take. So these are serious maritime security threats for our country. So in this context, we very categorically told Sri Lanka that we don't want you to sign a moratorium further. We leave it up to you. But the most important thing is that this is our red line. And at the diplomatic level, you dare not breach this red line, because if you happen to do this, it's not going to be a very positive part from anybody's perspective then. But then Sri Lanka communicated to us that they do need the Chinese because they want to use them for the purpose of economic development. It is in this context that India gave them a solution. India said that, see, we don't have any problem with you engaging with the Chinese economically, but tell us, what is that thing that the Chinese give you that we cannot provide? The Sri Lankan said it's connectivity and port development. It is in this backdrop that India proposed, along with the United Arab Emirates, a trilateral diplomatic engagement with Sri Lanka, which is to be seen as a part of the larger 2+1 dialogue, where two, that is India and UAE plus Sri Lanka, so 2+1, these three people now engage with each other, and they engage where India provides, along with UAE, all support to the Sri Lankans to help them develop their connectivity projects, their ports. So this is our way of working with the Sri Lankans and working and thereby reducing the influence of China. So we don't want to enter into any kind of confrontational diplomacy as of now with China in Sri Lanka. We don't want to also put Sri Lanka in an awkward situation where we try to pressurize them that, see, we are not going to permit you or let you engage with anybody else. But at the end of the day, one thing is very clear. We have communicated in this visit our own red lines, and we have also ensured that we will do with Sri Lanka whatever it takes to mitigate the influence of China. So I believe this video was helpful to you to understand the larger dynamics at play, and I'll keep making more videos as per the demand of the situation and as per the things that keep on going on in the news. Thank you.